Well, welcome.
Yeah. Well, for the last 12 years, I have worked for an organization called Youth with a Mission. And most people call it YWAM for short. And essentially, we take college-age students who want to figure out their life, figure out their relationship with God, and we take them through a 6-month program. In the first 3 months, it's all about knowing God. How do you study the Bible? How do you pray? What does God expect out of your life? A lot of relational things, a whole list of topics you can cover in 12 weeks. And then we send them all over the world. We break them up into teams, and they spend 3 months volunteering with churches, trying to share their faith with other people. And over that 6 months, it's a pretty transformative experience because they're just challenged in so many different ways. They're experiencing cultures and uncomfortable situations, and oftentimes there's a couple people on the team that they don't really like or get along with. And so there's just so many opportunities for them to kind of get a microcosm of what it's like in the real world, and how to have hard conversations and connect with people that see the world very differently than you.
Right.
And so I've been with this program for the last 12 years. And so, after 12 years, you kind of have heard a lot of different people teaching, and your view of the world changes. And so I figured, why not start trying to share this kind of stuff on social media?
Yeah.
And so I don't know exactly. Within the last year, 6-9 months maybe, I started making content and sharing it on Instagram, and just had quite a conviction about how important it is to have a biblical worldview, and how that shapes how you live and how the impact that we're supposed to have in our communities. And then, also trying to be effective in how we talk about Jesus to other people, and just saw a lot of people struggling with that, and thought, okay, why not try to help them out a little bit? And so, yeah, that's
awesome.
And I think that's probably what you saw one of my reels or something.
Yeah.
So you kind of saw my current endeavor.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. It was through one of your shorts or your reels, and it was a really refreshing take, I would say, in terms of I think with social media, a lot of people fall into the trap of entertainment and trying to entertain people. Not that that's wrong or evil or bad or anything like that, but that's just the constant sort of underlying message is, if we don't have an entertaining form of content, then we can't really bring it across a helpful message with it as well. And I think what I found refreshing about yours is it was so gospel-centered, but it wasn't like a weird off-putting or things like that. It was just a very curious, inquisitive approach, the way you'd like ask a question and then give an answer. I found that really insightful and great as well, because it's sort of like you demonstrated that internal narrative that's maybe going on in some people's thought life, I suppose.
Yeah, if you scroll back a little ways, you can kind of see when I got started. I really didn't know how, my style or what was going to work, and so you can see me fumbling around a little bit trying to figure out what to do, and it wasn't having much success. And then it was actually one of my favorite guys on TikTok. He would do these kind of funny skits with himself,
right?
And I thought, why don't I try one of these things? And it just, everything clicked. It was like I was able to kind of navigate some of these tricky conversations and ideas, and it landed. And then that's when I had my first any sort of real traction. And I thought, okay, this is probably the direction I need to go for, at least for a little while. And so it's been really fun to try to articulate some of these lessons that have really impacted me, and then And then it's really interesting to see how people respond.
Yeah, I could
And,
imagine.
you hit these little pockets of resistance where people are like, what? Like, no, you can't share the gospel. That's not the real gospel. Or, I did one about, a Christian's role in government and in being involved in the political process. And man, so many people, to my surprise, were just like, no, Christians shouldn't have anything to do with government or politics. And, it's like, man, this was really eye-opening to see how, people are responding. And I guess it's you never really know if you're getting an honest sample of the population, or am I just getting a bunch of the people that are way out on the fringes and how they think, or is this representative of our generation and how they think? But luckily, there's a lot of encouraging comments too, so that kind of helps me know I'm in the right direction.
How do you deal with that in terms of I suppose when you put something out there and it can be divisive or unexpectedly divisive, and you sort of have to deal with negative feedback or negative comments or just really people just spewing their opinions?
Yeah, there's always a moment of kind of a little bit of trepidation, because you're like, did I actually say something that was off? Like, did I not think deeply enough about what my words meant? But generally, if I have a pretty strong conviction about my view, I feel pretty resolute and it doesn't really bother me, because a lot of these ideas that I'm sharing, they're not necessarily my ideas that I came up with. I'm listening to kind of some of the most respected teachers around me, or in my sphere. And so I think there's a lot of safety in that, where I'm like, well, if they disagree with him, I think they're probably wrong. And so a lot of times I'm kind of like, okay, did I mess up in articulating that? Did I say something that I didn't mean in intention?
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of times I'm able to kind of, see, oh, this person maybe hasn't thought too deeply about this subject. And so it's kind of fun in the comments to try to engage with some people and change their mind. And, every once in a while some people are just trolls, and, you can kind of have fun with them and,
Right.
say some ridiculous things back. But, there's generally some people that are like, whoa, I haven't thought about it this way, or, a lot of people don't respond, but
Yeah.
it's kind of fun to believe at least that I'm changing a lot of haters' minds out there,
Yeah, that's awesome. So you do take a moment in your day to respond to all sorts of different comments and thoughts.
Yeah, one, I think, doesn't it help the algorithm? So I'm like, this will just
True.
help it go further. More content. And then maybe the more altruistic side of myself, I'm thinking, okay, I really do want to help these people. And
Awesome.
I've actually been surprised at some of the DMs, just the genuine hunger and vulnerability that people have. Now, maybe that's a bad sign. I'm like, this random stranger on Instagram is the only person you have to reach out and ask for advice.
Right.
You don't have any other people in your life that you can reach out to. But, genuinely, there's some people that are reaching out asking for some serious advice, and
Awesome.
That's, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. It is, I suppose there's two sides, like you're saying. It is sad in a way that the question to be asked is, what's the community environment that they're currently in that doesn't allow or encourage the questions that they're asking? So that's, I suppose, the sad side of it. But then I suppose the positive side is, like, social media does provide a means for people who are in perhaps not the greatest circumstance to reach out to someone who is genuine like yourself and has a gospel-centered worldview and is going to respond from that mean and actually engage with that.
Yeah.
That's
at least for now, I am as you grow on the platform, I'm kind of like, how am I going to
How do you
keep up
maintain that?
with all these? I did something. I was researching something about curse words and doing it in my stories yesterday, and the amount of DMs that came through, I was like, holy cow, how am I going to keep up with this? And I'm by no means a very like big influencer yet. I just have, I'm in the 30,000s. So these people with 500,000 million followers, I don't know how they do it.
Yeah, it's sort of, I suppose it becomes like, I wouldn't have a clue how they do it if they do still engage, or if there's like really strict boundaries that have to put in place for themselves, I could imagine as well. Otherwise it could just get overwhelming, right?
Yeah, I would imagine they have to come up with some different way to engage, but we'll figure that out when I get there, right?
Yeah. Is that so what's the dream, I suppose, or the hope in terms of what you're doing and what you want to do with it?
Yeah. Well, I listened to a lot of Jordan Peterson, and so he has provoked me. This idea that you have a moral obligation to be everything that you have potential to be. That has really provoked me and said, okay, how do I approach this? Not with a casual attitude, but if I'm going to be a force for good, if I'm going to be salt and light, I need to really approach this with excellence and kind of a vision on how can I be the best and biggest influence that maybe God would allow me to be. And I don't really have a specific number in mind about what success looks like, because I think, when I started this, I realized, okay, no matter how many people respond, I want to do a good job at vocalizing the worldview and these important lessons. And so I think a lot of it, at least for now, is just my success is like, am I developing my mind? Am I studying? Like, do I know the Bible? Am I continuing to be out there sharing the gospel, so that one of YWAM's values is do first and then teach. And so that is deeply inside of me, is like, I don't want to just be this academic person that shares these ideas. I want to be living this, so I have real authority. And so I think that's a lot of where my mindset is right now, is how do I develop my own thinking and expertise so that when people come to me with answers, I have something substantial to say.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So you mentioned before, in terms of something you noticed with your generation. What generation are you a part of, by the way?
I'm 38, so I'm
millennial.
Squarely in the millennial category.
Yeah, nice.
But I for the last 10 years, I've been working with young people. So I would say the majority of my friends right now are Gen Z, just because that's what the YWAM environment looks like. And so I think I am baptized in their culture quite a bit.
Yeah, well, clearly as well, because the content and the material that you're engaging with is very much that generation, sort of Gen Z, Gen Alpha. And that's why also, in terms of what like really drew me to it, was because it was so different to what else is out there. I mean, you'd know so much better than I would. It just seemed a lot different. And like, again, that gospel centrality that came through, I thought was great. And I think that's what like the younger generation and millennials as well are craving. One of the reasons I started this podcast is just noticing for my generation, I'm in that millennial bracket as well, is there's this separation between like your faith and your life. So what you do outside of church or outside of your home, whether it's like work or playing sport or whatever it may be, it's sort of this wrestle with like, my faith is very much private, and I don't really know how to be true to that whole side of my identity. And a big part of that, I suppose, is just conversation. So people aren't able to engage with their faith in conversations in everyday life and just how it informs different views that they may have in the world. And I think that's something that you're doing in that short form content, which is so helpful. And another fascinating thing as well is, I'm not sure how it is like in America or in Hawaii, but there's been this massive exodus of millennials and then Gen Zs from the church over the past recent years. So is that something that's happening is something that you've seen even within YWAM, I suppose? Have you noticed there's been a shift in people's faith or their identity in faith?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you saw it in millennials. Like I noticed my friends that stopped going to church and kind of a lot of deconstruction and, dissatisfaction. And I don't know, maybe they were seeing real hypocrisy in the church and just said that doesn't appeal to me. But they tended to kind of, it seemed like, go towards more of a materialistic worldview or, agnostic. Like, I don't know what to think, and, we just need to love each other. Where it seems like Gen Z, for the most part, they kind of embrace this spiritual worldview that says, I know that we're not just atoms and matter. Like, there's definitely, I don't have a problem believing there's angels and demons. But I think they're also looking for answers from, I don't know, more New Age movements and kind of probably pretty skeptical about how the traditional church would tell them, hey, here are the rules on engaging in the spiritual world. So it seems like there's a real openness to spirituality, but it's like, well, they either want like there is spiritual hunger, but they want to hear it in a language that is a little bit different than traditional like church language.
Right.
They really, it seems like they resonate, like they want to be spoken to very directly, raw. And
is that something that you find churches struggle with, or is it something that like they need to maybe empower some younger generation to have a voice, or what do you think the answer is to that?
I mean, I by no means have my pulse on like the whole church and how they're responding to it. It seems like there are a lot of churches that recognize these trends, and there's a lot of groups that are doing research and saying, hey, we need to speak to Gen Z in a different way, and are trying to respond to it. But yeah, it almost seems like there's something in Gen Z that wants some hardcore version of discipleship and Christianity. They don't want just the pretty, like, go to church on Sunday, a small group once a week. Like, it's not real or gritty or all in enough. And maybe that's because there's a sense of, where do I get my meaning, my purpose, my community? And so I kind of have the feeling I was listening to John, it was an old podcast, but it was between John-Mark Comer and John Tyson.
Oh, yeah. And
they were talking about spiritual formation and what discipleship tools are we going to offer young people? And it kind of really provoked me, because one of our young leaders sent it to me. And so, if it's on his mind and this is something burning in this young 20-year-old's heart and saying, like, there's something in this that's really gripping me, I'm kind of paying attention and saying, this message is resonating. We should pay attention.
Yeah.
And so, I sent the video to one of the leaders that I work with, and I was like, I just wonder, is what we're doing and what we're offering, is it working, or is there a new tool, a new method that Gen Z needs? because I don't know. I'm just looking at least America and saying, whatever we're doing, it's not going to meet the need. Like if we just stay status quo, there's no way there's any hope. We have to do something radically different and experiment and try until we see something light these young people up and see them starting to live that radical life that Jesus called us into. So, but I am the type of person that's an innovator, and I like to experiment and try new things, and so I mean one thing that we're trying is we train about 600 or 700 students a year, and a lot of them, most of them, they feel like, okay, international missions, that's not my calling. I know I'm supposed to go back home to university or to work, something like that. But we're saying, I wonder if we can activate those guys to lead youth movements in their home city, to have living rooms of discipleship where it's Bible study, prayer, interceding for their city, and then going out and doing evangelism. So, we're trying different things to take risks. We're calling them house parties. We did one in Nashville, and we got one in Tacoma, Washington
That's awesome.
September.
What do they look like?
I went to a conference, and I was just like, no young person wants to go to a conference because it's corporate. It's like, it just doesn't, I don't think it appeals to Gen Z. Like,
it's very really clean and clinical, yeah.
Yeah, they want like the gritty family feel. And so we thought, okay, scrap doing it in a church, scrap doing it anywhere professional. Let's get in a house because it's relational, it's over food. And so we rented a huge Airbnb. It was way more expensive than I expected. But I raised the money, praise God. And we just got everybody in there. And we fed them meals, and then, we did our training. But we basically did everything and modeled everything that we wanted them to multiply. So we said, if we're going to do an evangelism night, okay, Saturday night, we're all going to go down to Broadway in Nashville and all do it together so that everyone knows, like, this is how you go as a big group, do evangelism, hear testimonies at the end, that whole thing. Mm-hmm. We're going to demonstrate what it looks like to preach a message in your living room, how to do worship, how to do a training. And then we basically kind of charged them all and said, okay, now it's your turn. Like, here, you got the training, now go do it and multiply it. And it's cool. There's a group in Ohio, there's a guy in Idaho, there's some Canadians that came. And, the hope is, could we, in every city across America and then into the world, start multiplying these youth movements that are, spiritual formation, teaching people about the importance of worldview and how to study the Bible and doing something with their faith and going out every week and sharing it. And I mean, it can just have such an impact for a young person to see a vibrant Christian community that's not like a program. Right. That's kind of like, if you see some person your age just absolutely burning for Jesus, that it messes with you. You're like, oh, I had no idea that was possible. If you grew up in kind of more of just a moderate church family, which I totally believe in, and you need it. And I think that's what these youth movements eventually could evolve into. But there needs to be something dynamic for young people to see that's messy and gritty.
Yeah, and that sort of authenticity, it's authentic to the human experience as well, I think. A recent example, or like, I'm sure you would know Forrest Frank, how he's just blown up very much so recently. And I think just hearing what you're sharing about, that's something that I feel like he examples really well, is that sense of not trying to put on a performance or a show. It's just that grittiness of human experience, his relationship with God, his relationship with his family or his child, and just how he is really enjoying the journey as well. I think that's something that, I think if people see someone enjoying their relationship with God, it makes such a huge, it shifts something in the heart. Something I've noticed is like there hasn't been a huge presence of older people. When I say old people, I'm thinking people who are retired and they sort of done their time, but that are really passionate for God either. And I think maybe there's also a disconnect between people leaving the church because there's this, like you're saying, there's this lack of authenticity. It's like, well, you get to a certain age and it's like Jesus doesn't mean anything to you anymore. Like, I don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting conversation, because it does feel like the ways that I connect with Jesus now feel quite different than when I did at 21.
Right.
And, there was something so appealing and something I really needed to get into a room full of people like yelling and shouting and just being very emotional, like getting their heart into it. And I could sing the same choruses over and over and over. And now I kind of feel like what is at least scratching the itch in my soul is something a bit more contemplative and thoughtful. And I need those emotional moments too. But yeah, I wonder, what by the time I'm in my 80s, what it's going to look like to connect with Jesus. But I will say I do know that my grandpa's an example, Lauren and Darlene Cunningham, who founded YWAM. They're taking risks to follow the Lord into their 80s, and that has always really provoked me. Like my grandpa, I just interviewed him on my podcast, and in the last couple of years, he's talked to like 500 people, and he goes to the grocery store or wherever he's at, and he's like, I could talk to 2 or 3 people a day, and I just ask them their name, and I start a conversation, and he's like, maybe like there was this couple at a grocery store, cashier and a bagger, they were dating, this young couple in their 20s, and over a year he got to know them. And then he invited him. He's like, why don't you guys come over for a meal? He cooked him a meal, shared the gospel, and they both gave their life to Jesus.
Wow.
And I was like,
that's awesome. That is so good.
My 88-year-old grandpa is like out on the front lines, like giving it his guts, sharing Jesus. And I was like, that is so provoking, because I'll run in and out of Target so fast and not think about any of the people I run into. And so it's provoking me, like, okay, I got to stop and see the people around me. And
right.
So we need more people like that are in their 80s and authentically pursuing Jesus.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is like hearing those stories is so encouraging to be like, well, in terms of our relationship with Jesus keeps growing and we keep maturing as we walk with him. But it doesn't mean, I think, like, if you meet an 80-year-old who's known Jesus for, like, 50 years or however long of their life, and they have this hardness to them and they don't have time to engage in conversation, or they don't have time to, there's just like a hard outer shell. I feel like that's a very different relationship to that example you gave of your grandpa. Is like, well, there's like a softness, there's that, wow, he like a tenderness of Jesus. It's that example, like, it feels like what Jesus would be doing. It feels like Jesus has captured this man's heart or this lady's heart. And that's something that I think, I reckon there's a space for that encouragement in the church as well. And that would, like, I do reckon that would help the younger generations as well, inspire them and encourage them and just show them that, like, faith is real. It's something that isn't this set of rules that sort of restrict you, but it adds liberty and freedom and and joy and love into your everyday life.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I look at my grandpa, I look at Lauren and Darlene, and I said, if I can be like that in my 80s, I've won.
Yeah.
That's success.
Yeah.
To be tender-hearted, in love with Jesus, happy, that's not easy.
No, it's not. I was at a conference a couple years back, and I don't know. Have you heard of Ray Ortland?
Mm-mm.
So his son recently wrote a book called Gentle and Lowly. It's a great book. But Ray is like a 75-year-old man, and in this conference he was talking about just the relationship he has with his sons, and then he spoke of the relationship he had with his father, and he was just talking about, so it's a 75-year-old man talking about how his father would go to his ball games as a teenager and just be the loudest one cheering at his games, but then also at practice, and what that did to him.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, if we can capture what it is like to enjoy our community and enjoy people around us,
Yeah.
How beautiful of a picture would that be or create a space for people to encounter Jesus?
I mean, it runs so counter to what our generation is hearing. Everybody's like, you're successful if you have this many people on Instagram and you're making this much money, and so it seems backwards to focus on, hey, this is just focus on the people around you in community.
Yeah.
And so, but I had this very powerful moment. In the last year, my grandma and my grandfather on my mom's side, they died, and by the world standards, they didn't. They pretty much stayed in Illinois their whole life. They didn't travel the world or run any huge businesses or anything like that. And but I just thought about how much of an impact that they had in my life. Hold on one second.
No worries.
I just had people walk into the room. Sorry, guys, I'm recording a podcast.
The joys of YWAM.
It's a studio room, and they store stuff in the room.
No, that's all good. I could see, I could hear something, but then I could also see your attention trying to capture.
I know, my concentration. I was like, oh man.
I totally get that. That's all good.
I think they were just moving a few things, and then.
No worries.
There's a film school here on the campus, and so they are shooting their short films and things like that. But they store all their equipment in the same room.
Yeah.
And so I guess they must be getting back from a shoot or something.
Nice. Do you have much involvement in that school?
No. My brother-in-law, he works with that school.
Okay.
Okay, they're gone.
Oh, that's so good.
Oh, man.
Carry on.
Okay, so I'm backtracking, just thinking about how the message being given to Gen Z is you are successful through all these markers, your finances, your influence, your power. But what's really interesting, you can tell it just seems like ubiquitous. Gen Z is so hungry for community.
Yeah.
And that's, building a family and investing in the people around you. That's what their heart is longing for. But everything in culture is saying, build your career, don't focus on family and kids. And it's like so backwards and upside down. And I was thinking about my mom's grandparents. We called them Mimi and Papa. And they lived in this kind of these small towns in Illinois their whole life. And they both passed away 2 years ago or something like that. And being at their funerals, I reflecting on the deep impact that they had on my life. And I was like, my entire life was shaped by these two people, but they, by Gen Z's standards, Instagram, how much money they made, did they travel the world?
Right.
You wouldn't check the box for like success, but as far as like building tradition and family and community and putting values in us, I was like, my whole world was shaped by that. And so that kind of helped me see the real deep value for community and family, and saying, we can't ignore how important that is in as we write up these things that say this is where our meaning and purpose come from.
Yeah. Oh, man, it's so funny you say that, because I recently and still am currently doing some research into find out, particularly here in Perth, what Christians need to enjoy their life, or what they want to enjoy their life, and what fears and desires they have, and what questions they're asking, how the gospel answers those questions. And I was looking at and analyzing some of the data a couple of days ago, and I'd say the top two things that particularly millennials and Gen Zs are asking are that, like, or value is community, saying we need community to enjoy life. We need community to have this sense of calling or fulfillment. And then the other interesting one as well was time as well. So time was another thing that came out, as like we don't feel like we have time to enjoy the things that we're wanting to enjoy, which was just a fascinating side thing. But that community was so like prevalent. It was like it outnumbered all the other responses. It's just that desire to be in relationship. But then, like you're saying, it's so opposite of culture, where the culture here in Australia is very much individualistic. So it's, you need to live your best life. You do what's on your heart. Any sacrifice that you make isn't going to give you fulfillment if it's not like a sacrifice someone else is making for you. So it's very fascinating how there's this desire of community, and then it's sort of counterbalanced by this cultural stream that people are stuck in, where it's individualistic and self-serving, but people are wanting to get out the stream to community but just don't know how. Yeah. What's your thoughts on the how, I suppose? Like how do we engage in this culture to show people that, like, there's a space where they can, like, have this, find community, find relationship?
Yeah. Oh, it's really interesting you bring that up, because that's one of those things that John Tyson was talking about this morning on that podcast I listened to, and he was just talking about how all these things are breaking down. Everything that people were looking for identity and meaning and purpose, whether that was capitalism or secularism or any of the isms that they kind of would bind themselves to, and they were both pointing to Bonhoeffer and how important that little community out. I think it was way out in the wilderness or something, but he got these group of, I think, men together, and kind of said, we're gonna do something quite countercultural, but it's gonna be deep formation. It's gonna be in community, and it's for the purpose of being countercultural. And I haven't read this book, but my buddy read this book. What was it? It's a Rodney Stark book, something about civilizations, and it was talking about how Christianity grew, like it was like 300%, maybe every year. It was, in Rome, the early church grew so fast,
right?
And part of it was just because of it wasn't necessarily all evangelism. It was just the fact that how Christians lived You know, they didn't kill their babies. They took care of the sick when plagues came through. They had that tight community, and that was one thing that really drew people in.
Mm.
And so, you know, in some sense, it's not a new answer because it's been happening since the first century church. But it definitely seems like, at least in the West, we kind of embrace that individualistic Christianity where, you know, we put it in the box where we go on Sunday, we have a small group on Wednesday, but I'm living my own life.
Mm.
Where one thing I really liked about YWAM was you get thrown into this community, and it's not like you go to your job, then you come home and spend the rest of your day doing your individual life with the people that you want. It's like I'm thrown in here, and my work, my life, my friends, they're all integrated.
Right.
And I think that's something that's so appealing. It was appealing to me, and I kind of feel like there's something in that's what every heart craves for. It's like,
yeah,
to be those like ride or die group of people. It's like we are bound together on a mission, and we have these core values and principles that we've all said yes to. You know, those biblical truths, worldview, and then the reason why we come together is to expand the kingdom of God. And so that gives your life a lot of meaning and purpose when you start to see, oh, I see how my gift contributes to this, you know, mission, to this community. And so my gut is telling me that this generation wants, they saw the product that the Western Church built, the Sunday Christianity, and they said, it's not doing it for me. I want something deeper, more integrated, where these are the people I'm rolling with, because it's not like I'm finding community in these other places because my worldview is so different than the people I'm surrounded with, and so, you know, that's going to look so much different whether you're a YWAMer versus somebody in corporate America. So I don't necessarily. I don't know the answers. I think there's something in this house party that I'm excited about where, you know, these young people, maybe it's, I don't know, community living. People have been trying to do community living for so long, but then you have kids and it's like, well, get out of my house.
Kids go to sleep.
It works in YWAM. I live in a community house. I've got 8 people in my house. You know, all the YWAM families have people living with them, and young people love that.
Yeah.
And so maybe we need more of that in our churches. But, you know, it's our whole system of suburban living isn't necessarily built for that. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because I think if the culture becomes more and more anti-Christian, then Christians are going to have to bind together more. And that's going to be the community that everybody's longing for. And then it'll flourish and grow and influence again. So.
Yeah. There is something so beautiful about that community living. I think people, when you get kids or maybe it's a personality type as well, I'm not too sure. Because now I'm like processing my thoughts. I'm like, oh, I know people who have not liked community living, and then they've had kids and they're so thankful they're not in it. But in terms of, I'm like, I've always idolized it, like in the sense of, let's just find a farm somewhere next to the coast, and like everyone just move down there. Let's just live off the land, love each other, love the local community around us, and just do life together. Like that's just so appealing to me.
That is so appealing to our generation. That's kind of like a sign of where we're at right now.
Yeah.
But I will say just on the community side of things, there's so much. The family that I lived with, they were so grateful to have a bunch of these aunts and uncles help raise their kids.
Yeah.
And free babysitting and helping with chores and dishes and things like that. So there's a cost to it for sure. But I would say a lot of people way underestimate the benefits by embracing some of the awkwardness for sure.
Yeah.
of community living. It is unusual, but it was one of the great things that formed me.
Yeah.
And so I am a big believer in it, even with kids.
100%. I'm so on board. I think even just getting back to that whole idea of the table and sharing meals together and being able to bring people into your home, I think so important, because we do live such individual lives and we try and protect our space and protect our time. When I think that's where a lot of ministry and a lot of life's done, is allowing people to come into your space or going into other people's space. Like, I just think of how much of Jesus' ministry was done around a table. And then how he invited himself over as well to other people's houses. If he didn't have a place, it's like, it was just...
I like that move. I use that.
Yeah, you do? I love that. Well, sure. Yeah, if you're ever coming over this way, feel free to do that with myself.
Okay, deal. 100%.
Yeah, but I think there is, going back to that idea of authenticity and what Gen Z may be craving, I think it lives in that place of community, because it's difficult to hide like so say if you have kids, for example, it's easy in a way to turn up on Sunday or even not turn up on Sunday when the kids are having a bad day. But when you're living in a space of community, or you have people over and you see the messiness of the house, or you see the kids throwing a tantrum and there's that engagement, it's awkward, 100%. But there's something so like necessary to be able to be rubbing shoulders with that, because that's what life is. It's not this highlight reel of your life. It's the mundane moments of every day. And I think those mundane moments add up to something that people are like, this is what I want to live for. I want to be able to be a part of a community that embraces one another, that sees your flaws and yet still are willing to engage. Like that whole idea of acceptance, and I'm valued no matter what I've done. I read a Tim Keller quote just recently. It was something along the lines of, even if you're 1,000 times worse than you currently are today, God's love for you would like remain the same, or his grace would be endless. Something along those lines. I've butchered it, but the heart's there. That's like we see ourselves and we often condemn ourselves because we're not good enough. And there's just this like idea that God just wants to be in relationship with us. We don't need to fix ourselves. Let him do that as we journey with him. And I think you really find that worked out in community, right? Yeah,
it definitely provides accountability. Like, are you living the life that you say that you're living? And I remember some of the most powerful moments in my early years of YWAM were when there's this couple, Blake and Shannon, and Blake has always been, his humility has really marked me. And to see him, come to us and say, hey, I totally blew up, I didn't handle that well with Shannon or the kids.
Yeah.
And it was just, those were the moments that I really remember, his humility and saying like, whoa, I want to be like that. We're all going to have moments where we screw up, but to have the humility and say, hey, I know I signed up for a higher standard, and, would you forgive me? This is, I want to get back towards aiming at the proper center, which wasn't how I reacted last night. And so, I've always thought that one of the great things about community living was the accountability and just the amount it provokes you. The people I'm around, like, if I was living by myself, your imagination only goes so far about what's possible. But then all of a sudden you have these other people in your life, and, whether it's the discipline that they bring to their personal health and fitness, or how they spend time with the Lord, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I never thought that was possible. But it provokes me to say, whoa, maybe my limits are larger than I thought.
I love that. Yeah, that's so true. C.S. Lewis has this like wonderful idea of friendship and of just Christ, and how people around you and friends around you highlight things firstly in Jesus that you wouldn't see just being on your own. And that sort of plays into the idea that we need one another, like, to be in relationship with Jesus. It's not this isolated faith.
Yeah.
And then the other side is they bring out things in yourself as well that you didn't know were there. So he talks about it. If you've read Four Loves, he says when one of his friends died, it wasn't just a loss of their friend, but it was a death in each one of them. Because, for example, if myself and you were good friends and you died, then it's like your presence brings something out of myself. It brings an aspect out of myself that without you there, that would never come to light and never come to being. And profound. It's this idea of community just adds so much value to life. So I'm always thinking about that thought that he sort of shares. Is just like, wow, that is so profound and so beautiful, and it encourages me to engage instead of like withdraw, because it's like, well, I want to discover more of Jesus, and learn more about him, and see these different aspects of him. He's not one dimensional, and the way you see him will be different to the way I see him. And then also I want to see what he's doing in my life that I might not know of, that others bring out in myself as well. So I really love what you're saying with that idea of how important community is.
Yeah. Yeah, it has definitely been one of the main things that has formed me over the last 12 years. And I've often, for a long time I've bemoaned, I'm like, oh man, I'm in my 30s, I'm still sleeping in a bunk bed, like what the heck? But, that's one of the prices. But then I was like, at the end of the day, everything that I'm gaining from this far outweighs, what kind of a bed I sleep in,
Right. Yeah, I love that. And this question may be far left field, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So I'm happy to cut it out if you. But have you chosen to live a single life? Is that something you've chosen?
Well, that's an interesting way to word it, because I definitely I definitely think that I have made choices, and being single is not somebody else's fault. I think it's mine. But no, I would say the easy answer is no. I would love to be married, and there's a number of reasons that I have unpacked over the last couple of years of why my relationships in the past have not been successful. But yeah, it's interesting. There's plenty of willing blindness in there, or just immaturity, where you're like, oh, I had no idea that was an issue. But going back to social media, I think it was an Australian guy, and he had some one of his reels or something was, going back and forth with himself, but talking about symptoms of somebody with an avoidant attachment. Right. And somebody had sent me this book on attachment theory, and I looked at it, I was like, oh my gosh, he's just like reading my mail right now. So part of it was some of the people that I tried dating early on, it was a combination of me not being in the right place, and her not being in the right place, and then at the end of the day, who knows? Maybe God
Right.
really has had a purpose in it all. So it's some strange combination of my issues, God's will, and hopefully, one of these days it's gonna get resolved. I would love to start a family.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I think it also ties into that that question that so many people, I think everyone asks, is like purpose, and that people try to find their identity in relationships or in finance or in their career. And I think it sounds like the journey that you're on is you've found your relationship, or not your relationship, your identity and your purpose in following Christ. Which I suppose that's something that is so encouraging. What would you say it means particularly, or how does finding your purpose look in the generation that you come from and the generation that you're working with?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was a very still quite an ambitious person, and so I had a lot of I pulled a lot of meaning and purpose from the work that I did to serve and to build YWAM here. And I think in a lot of ways that was really healthy and good. And my days have been filled with incredible relationships and friendships and work that really is changing people's lives. And I think that's where you're supposed to find some of your purpose and meaning, is how do you contribute to the community that God has called you to be a part of? And what part do you play in the mission that community, like why does that community exist, and how do you help further that? But Jordan Peterson was the one that kind of opened my eyes to, your career is one part of it, but then your marriage and your family, your kids, that's going to be a huge part of your purpose and your life's calling. Yeah. And I think I was a bit blind to that, and I think I did undervalue how significant that was. And so there was, being single for this long, it's quite lots of ups and downs. And, there was a season where I didn't think about it or care about it at all, because I was like driven. I wanted to build and, lead teams and grow in leadership and influence and things like that. And, that really drove me. And then kind of having the realization that, oh, wow, now I'm a lot older than I was expecting to be single. And then just the implications of what that meant for, raising a family and how, what marriage is going to be like. And so for a little while, I had to wrestle with that, and just maybe the grief of that, or just basically accepting this is the road that I'm on or have chosen. And then you get to a place where you're like, okay, you know what? I have to just accept that this is where I am, and it's not the story that I thought that I would have, but just and then getting to a place where I'm like, no, if trusting, if God's allowed me to be in this situation, there must be good. I have to call it good, because He can make it good. Yeah. And so I don't know, the acceptance phase, and so I guess now when I talk to some of my young leaders, that I see that same ambition and drive in them, I'll kind of say, hey, watch out. You might not want to go down the road that I've gone down.
Right.
The value for, really working on dating and figuring out marriage. For some people, I feel like it comes super easy, but, I see a lot of the really talented people that I work with that can tend to be a little bit more driven, and the relationships aren't coming as naturally to them. I've kind of sat them down and just told them, like, is this something that you really want? Is it a value that you have? Then the way that I've been intentional over the last, several years to work on it and try to figure out what was holding me back. Why don't you start that journey a little bit earlier?
Very good, yeah.
And because I really do, I think, when I looked at it as just the ambition that I had in a career, that was too narrow of a value of where your meaning and purpose. And so I like broadening it, to include family. But I will say, throughout history, there's been priests and nuns who've been celibate, and I think you can be part of that family. Like, oh my gosh, what was that? Cabrini? Did you see that movie?
No.
Angel Studios came out with it. It was in theaters here in America, but oh my gosh, was it a powerful movie about this nun who had a vision from the Lord about how she wanted to impact the world, and wanted to go to China, I think, and the Pope said, "Why don't you start in New York? You speak Italian. There's all these poor Italian families in New York that need help," and so she, the story of what she overcame and essentially built this huge empire of hope, hospitals and orphanages all around the world. But I looked at her life and I thought, well, she was a nun, she was single, but she found, she had those community and the family aspect. It was built a different way. It wasn't through marriage and her own kids, but she had this tight group of nuns around her that had a purpose. And so I looked at that and I thought, there is, for people that either want to be or called or just through life circumstances are single, that you can have such a fulfilling life.
Yeah, 100%. I interviewed earlier this year a guy by the name of he's a priest, Ronald Rollheiser, and one of the reasons I wanted to interview him was because of his singleness, and he had written this book which was just so profound in terms of from a parent's point of view. So it was like I was just fascinated by the idea of like he has these profound insights into parenting and into like that relationship, yet he has been single his whole life. And because it was very impactful for myself, it was just like one of the main ideas was how your everyday, like when you doing the dishes or when you're changing your kid's diaper, like those are acts that can turn into worship to God. So you can be intentional about it, and how it can, because it can be condemning when you're like, oh man, I haven't had time to have a quiet time this morning or just be with God. And one of the things in his book was like, it's like feeds into that contemplative lifestyle of, well, your spiritual life and your everyday life is actually more interconnected than we realize.
100%.
And it's basically becoming aware of moments in our everyday life where the Spirit of God is moving and where we can be in a state of worship to Him. And like you're saying, is that for him came from a place of relationship and like community, and it's not, singleness doesn't mean isolation from community. Just like someone who's in a marriage or in a relationship can be very much isolated from community. It's like that intentionality that we have to choose to be a part and to build, and even when it's awkward at times, I suppose. Yeah,
that's great insight.
Yeah. Well, just aware of the time. One final question for yourself is how would you encourage people, particularly Gen Zs, to find their purpose? I know it's a big sort of question, and to pursue community.
Yeah. Well, I think in a general sense, I really like this picture of, if you go to Genesis 1 and 2, I think you can see the picture of what we were supposed to be. God created the earth, and then he planted a garden in the east, and he put man in that garden. And he said, take dominion, and I think he was saying, go out, expand the garden. I want the whole world to be ordered according to my ways. And so that means Christians have a call to go into these places that are dark and chaotic and order them and basically replant the Garden of Eden. And I love that picture because it's just, you can see that theme all throughout the Bible. Noah's Ark and the tabernacle and Mary carrying Jesus, that God has always saved the DNA that it takes to replant the garden. And essentially, Jesus is this tree of life and allows believers now to wherever there's darkness to kind of show up and say, okay, this is God's order, and this is how to have abundant life, and this is what the garden looks like. And so I think everyone, God has a unique calling for every person. He created some people to love government, finance, music, science, and all those places have so much need for people that understand God's ways to enter them and to use their gifts and say, here's how to shape society or our business or the institution according to the structure that how God is supposed to properly lay it out, according to a biblical worldview. So you think about a famous example is William Wilberforce. He saw slavery and he was like, this is an area of chaos and darkness. This is not the perfect garden. This is that area that's unformed.
Brilliant.
And he said, I'm going to go into government. God has called me into government, and I'm going to teach them the value, biblical values. And I don't know exactly if he used that language, biblical values, or he just said, no, every person has human dignity, and it was a biblical value. And he ordered the whole world, and he transformed the whole world. And every believer has that calling to look at the darkness around them and say, I am not going to stay, in my little farmhouse and plant my own vegetables and be safe. There's a real call from God to go into the darkness and say, let me be with the hurting, the poor, the broken, and realign it with God's ways and to bring wholeness and healing and plant the garden again. And that comes from applying biblical principles and leading people into salvation. It's some combination of that. And so what I would say to a young person, like with that framework in mind, that they have a gift and that there is darkness that they need to tame, that I think the most important thing is to find the community that you're supposed to be a part of. To look at the people, the older people that you really look up to and say, I want to be like that someday. And join that community, whether that is finding a mentor in the business world, finding a group of artists that you really like working with. And then once you're in that community, it's basically, then the next step would be, what is that mission field that God puts in front of you? And so maybe he highlights, high school students, and like they're dealing with anxiety and depression. Maybe it's an unreached people group in, the Himalayas, and you're like, I need to find a group of people that are reaching those people. God showed me, highlighted those people, I need to go. And I think that's where you find your meaning and purpose, is by finding that gift, the unique thing that God has equipped you with, and saying, I'm with this group of people, we're going to have a mission together to transform this area of society. And so, it's hard to do on your own. And I know some people, are pioneers and they can do it, but most people, they need to find a community that's going after that area of passion. So if like you've cried over watching things about sex trafficking, you need to find who are those, who's the organization, who's the church, who's the missions group, that's doing something that you look up to them and say, wow, they're doing everything that I want to do. And you need to go join them and then just figure out, how do I serve? Where are the needs? How do I serve so that we can accomplish this mission together? So, yeah, you have to discover what you're good at, and that, usually takes your 20s. And being a part of a community is the best way, because you start seeing needs, and people are like, well, we need an administrator, and then you do that, and you're like, I hate having it. And then, they're like, okay, fine, we have another need. We need somebody to go up on stage and give a compelling speech, and you go do that, and you're like, man, that lit me up. I love that. And all of a sudden, your need and your skills mesh together, and then you're running after your purpose, and you're like, I know why I have these skills. I see the darkness, and I'm going to go transform it.
Brilliant. I love that. Yeah, well, thanks so much for carving out the time in your day to have this conversation, John-Mark. It's been, a real privilege, and I've enjoyed it. So hopefully you have as well.
I have. Thanks very much, Caleb.